kind of what saved me was comedy, because after Dad and the boys died, what I would do, I'd read all the time, but when my mom said the lights had to be off, I would turn the volume on my speaker really low, and I would listen to comedy albums before I went to bed. So I had this little secret thing in my heart where I wanted to go do that.
You're somebody who really is open about your faith. And do you still teach, was it Sunday school or Bible study?
Sunday school, or Catholics call it CCD, catechism.
Okay. Catechism.
But
okay.
we call it Sunday school too. But no, I only did that for 3 years. I did it. I subbed in for some people, but I did it for 3 years. For the second year, each of our children went to Sunday school, because it started off because I'm a Catholic, my wife's Presbyterian. She's like, "What are they teaching him in there?" And I said, "I don't know. Why don't I go do it and find out like what the agenda is here?" I said, "I'm guessing it's Jesus, but let's go find out." And so that's what it was. It was Jesus. And it is great. I mean, teaching Sunday school is a very interesting way. Teaching Sunday school is like talking to interns at a television show. I love talking to the intern class. We get them together at the end of each of their intern, like every 3 months, because they ask great questions, very basic questions, the same kind of questions you were asking when you were their age, wondering, well, what am I going to do with my life? And it makes you re-examine, okay, why do I do this job? Or what's good about it? Or what's the challenges about it? It's really a good way to sort of refresh your own interest in what you do. Same thing for Sunday school. Man, 7-year-olds ask great questions. You think you're all cool, sophomore in college, getting high, asking these questions about God and eternity. They're asking those at 7. They're like, well, if God is eternal, what happened before time? And like, you're drawing Venn diagrams about eternity, and the kids are hanging with you. It's great. It's wonderful. And
did they ever stump you though? Did they ever stump
all
you?
the damn time? What came before God? What are you talking about? It's great. But I also really love, you get to reapproach beautiful stories. Like, man, the prodigal son is a beautiful story about forgiveness and love. And I remember a thing I learned when I was listening to it is that when I was reading it to the kids out of the study book, I was just struck that in the prodigal son, he doesn't show up on the door and say, "Dad, I'm home." The father saw him coming from afar. Meaning what? He's always looking. The father was always looking for the son to return. And that talks about love, and that talks about forgiveness, and that talks about this undeniable bond, no matter what face we may put on it with our friends and families. We want that togetherness. And that made that story very human and real in ways. And I would not have known that. I would not have thought about that unless I had told it to children.
How do you think your faith has added to your ability to perform?
Well, I was an altar boy for a long time, and I kind of felt like it was a stage. I really liked being up there. I didn't mind being looked at, especially if there's some girls I thought were kind of cute, and I got to hold the little paten underneath their chin while they're taking communion. That was kind of fun. But I liked the mass itself. The mass itself is a play. You're recreating the Last Supper every time. That's what it is. The mass is literally means the table, the meal. And so that's one small way. The other way is everything has to do with love eventually, I suppose. And I guess my faith calls us to love and to have a sense of togetherness. And that's what you're trying to create with a live performance, is you're exchanging some kind of food with each other. There's a communion there. You're creating a community, and what you're exchanging is a sense of agreement, or an emotional understanding, even if it's not agreement. Laughter takes away fear, and fear allows you to feel all the other emotions that fear is trying to protect you from. Fear and anger, those are really protecting you from another emotion. Or anger is certainly protecting you from expressing your fear. And fear is the mind killer that keeps you from knowing or feeling anything else. There's only the fear. And so if you can make people laugh, you can take away the fear for a moment, which takes away the anger, which allows them to feel and be open to the idea of community. Because fear is also always individual, and it makes you isolated. So I would say valuing love and community, which I got through my own religion and my own faith in God, and also the idea of forgiveness, makes you feel like tomorrow can be better, not only for the world but for yourself, is an important part for me as a performer. I mean, that's a scattershot answer because it influences me in so many ways. It's like, you know, it's like, can you separate a statue from the fact that it's made of marble? Is like, how does my religion affect me as a performer? They're too intertwined because my religion was too integral to my development.
Mm. It reminds me of something, what you said reminded me of something Michael Eric Dyson told me on this podcast when he said the older he gets, the more grace that he needs. And I firmly believe that, yeah, when you were talking about it teaches you forgiveness, that when you said that, that is what immediately came to mind. Allow me to be a really shitty host. I have one question for you before I get to a game that I play with all my guests. The question itself is not shitty, but it's one of those questions that usually comes at the beginning of the interview and not the end. But I'm so damn curious about it that I have to ask you. You were, at least based off everything that I read and even watching interviews that you've done that have been focused on you, is that you were an introvert as a kid, and it seems like growing up to a certain point. How does somebody, and I'm aware of the family tragedy that you suffered, but how is somebody who was once an introvert grow into being such a comfortable performer? I mean, I know it wasn't one thing. I'm sure it was probably plenty of little experiences, but I'm just wondering how you kind of overcame that part of it to grow to love acting and performing.
I am not, it's paradoxical, but I don't think it's necessarily a unique thing to be an introvert and to be a performer at the same time. Because certainly in character allows you to maintain your own private identity while you're inhabiting some other identity. I know, I mean, one of my favorite interviews, but famously kind of a difficult interview, is Robert De Niro, who is very private and seems very introverted. He doesn't seem to get his value from how somebody else is feeling about him at that moment. You know, so I don't think I'm alone in being an introvert and being a performer. I think it's two different things. I think as a very young child, I wasn't an introvert. I think as a very young child, I was an extrovert. But after the death of my father and my brothers, I think I experienced like some sort of psychic collapse. I think I became an introvert. I think I retreated in many ways. I think I took great value in the fact that I could go places in my mind where no one could follow me. And part of that was books, and part of that was just my imagination, and part of it was a sense of alienation from people my own age who had a different experience than I did, and my inability to express what that difference was. And so instead of even trying, I just pulled away, and that made me into an introvert. And I lived entirely in, and as you can see, I lived entirely in my books. But that's a lonely feeling. I mean, it's comforting, but it's ultimately lonely. I remember literally thinking of the books as my friends, and I could be intimate with them, and they could be intimate with me. And I read a book a day, like, because I was so hungry for that kind of friendship. And then I liked the ability to see and be seen on stage without really having done it. I don't know what it is that attracted to me being on stage, other than the fact that my mother trained to be an actress, and my mother and I were very close, especially after the death of Dad and the boys. And in some ways, I wasn't doing it for her, but I saw her as my example for everything. And she talked about it so glowingly and with such love of the theater that I thought I want to do that. And also, kind of what saved me was comedy, because after Dad and the Boys died, what I would do, I'd read all the time, but when my mom said the lights had to be off, I would turn the volume on my speaker really low, and I would listen to comedy albums before I went to bed. So I had this little secret thing in my heart where I wanted to go do that. I wanted to do what Cosby was doing. I wanted to do what George Carlin was doing or Steve Martin was doing. And I secretly admired them more than any other performers. But I didn't, listen, I'm a kid in South Carolina. How does somebody become, what's it mean to be a comedian? How do you do that? I didn't know. And it wasn't until I saw Sondheim's Sunny in the Park with George, where Mandy is singing the character George is talking about putting it together. And, looking through the world of a hat like a window, from this world to that, the idea that there's this whole other world and a sense of freedom and expression, that I thought, I want to go do that. I literally read my mom the lyrics to Finishing a Hat and said, I don't know how and I don't know in what way, but I have to go do this. And she was perfectly happy for me to go try. And then I met other people who were just as damaged as I was, who also wanted to do it, and they became my family as well. Paul Dinello, Amy Sedaris, many other people, but those two particularly. And I fell in love with the love that I felt from them, and the sense of camaraderie, of failing together, and that little death that happens when you die on stage, and yet you're not really dead. And that somehow was related to my morbid fascination with death at the same time, based upon the death that I'd experienced in my family. And ultimately, your question is, if you're an introvert, why are you a comedian? I don't know. I don't really know. I'm literally in real time trying to pick through it right now, because somebody can suffer tragedy and not become a comedian. And somebody can suffer tragedy and become a comedian, and I cannot begin to tell you what the difference is. But I can tell you that all those things had something to do with me wanting to be on stage and wanting to be to make something beautiful that would be good for other people.
Well, if that's off the cuff, that's a hell of an off the cuff answer. So I gotta say, I was like, pretty good. Hey, you did not make me regret asking that question. Though, again, admittedly, those are the things you ask at the beginning and not necessarily at the end. As you
well,
know,
I don't think I could have given you that answer. I don't think I could have given you the answer at the beginning.
Okay, make me feel better. I appreciate that. I'll accept it.